The sun had just begun its lazy crawl over the horizon when Michael Thornton first set foot on the property he had inherited from his late father, a sprawling, undisturbed piece of land on the outskirts of the town he had grown up in. It was more than just soil and trees, it was a legacy, a sanctuary of memories, laughter, and quiet moments that stitched together the fabric of his childhood. He could almost hear the echo of his father's voice telling him that this land was a place to dream, to build, to be free. But as he took in the fields stretching before him, Michael noticed something strange: the distant hum of machinery, the sharp smell of fresh concrete, and the faint clatter of hammers. His heart sank. A row of houses was rising on his land. 96 homes, if his quick count was right, each one an unforgiving monument of human ambition, constructed without his permission. Michael's first instinct was anger. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, as everyone called it, had overstepped every boundary imaginable. They had taken his father's land, carved it up like a pie, and began planting rows of identical houses where his father's orchard had once grown. The sight of cranes swinging over the old oak trees, the sound of workers drilling into foundations that should never have existed, sent a wave of helplessness crashing through him. He felt as if the very ground beneath him had betrayed him. But then he paused. Anger was a hot flame, consuming and temporary. His father had taught him patience, the value of measured action, and the importance of thinking long-term. So, instead of storming in with lawyers and cease and desist letters, Michael took a deep breath and decided to do something unexpected. He did not try to halt the construction. Instead, he observed, almost silently, letting the builders finish their work while he kept meticulous records of every detail, every permit they lacked, every boundary they had crossed. It was a quiet kind of resistance, the kind that required discipline and, strangely, faith. And in that quiet, something remarkable began to happen. The workers, many of them young fathers and mothers themselves, started to recognize Michael. He would wave from the edge of the property, offer them bottles of water, occasionally bring sandwiches. They expected confrontation. Instead, they found kindness. And gradually, a sense of community began to grow, not around the houses, but around the man who had chosen empathy over anger. Weeks turned into months, and the houses stood completed, rows of identical walls glinting under the sun. The town murmured with curiosity. Who was this man letting the HOA build on his land without protest? Some called him foolish, others called him patient. Michael didn't answer. He was preparing, silently, for the moment when justice would finally catch up to greed. And when that moment came, it was nothing short of extraordinary. In court, the HOA representatives were confident. They had spent thousands of dollars, convinced themselves they had secured a de facto claim to the land, and were certain the judge would favor them. But Michael had something far more potent than money or influence. He had patience, preparation, and the law meticulously on his side. As the judge reviewed the evidence, examining the chain of ownership and the illegitimate permits, the room fell silent. Michael's attorney presented the deeds, the correspondence, the photographs, and the logs he had kept from the first day he noticed construction. Each piece of evidence reinforced the simple truth: the land had always belonged to Michael Thornton. When the verdict was read, Michael felt a mix of relief and surreal disbelief. The court ruled in his favor. The land, every inch of it, was his. The HOA's claims were void. The crowd in the courtroom erupted, but Michael barely heard them. Instead, he looked at the rows of houses, now silent and completed, and a thought struck him with unexpected clarity. These homes represented more than trespass. They represented hope, shelter, and dreams for families who had moved in believing they had a right to be there. His father had always said that wealth was meaningless if it could not be shared, and suddenly, Michael understood that true justice was not just about reclaiming what was yours. It was about recognizing the humanity of others, even when they had wronged you. He made a decision that stunned everyone. Rather than evict the families who had unknowingly moved into the houses on his property, Michael offered them an extraordinary arrangement. He would sell the homes to them at cost, with zero profit, and extend financing options that would allow them to truly call these places home. Some cried, others laughed, but all were touched by the generosity of a man who had every legal right to demand more, yet chose compassion. The HOA, humiliated and defeated, had no choice but to comply. Word of Michael's actions spread quickly, first through the town, then through the state, and eventually across the country. People marveled at the story. A man who had been wronged so deeply chose not revenge, but kindness. And in that kindness, he transformed what could have been a bitter confrontation into a triumph of humanity. Over the months that followed, the neighborhood flourished. Gardens bloomed where weeds had once crept, children laughed in backyards that had once been fields, and neighbors, united by the generosity of a single man, formed a community stronger than any law regulation could have mandated. Michael often walked among the rows of homes, recalling the first day he had seen the construction begin. The anger he had felt seemed distant now, almost foreign. What remained was a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for his father's lessons, for the patience he had cultivated, and for the realization that even in the face of injustice, the human heart has the capacity for extraordinary grace. The families he had helped were thriving, and in return, they showered him with friendship, respect, and a sense of belonging he had never imagined he would feel. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, Michael stood on the edge of his land and looked out over what had once been a battleground of legal disputes and now stood as a testament to compassion. Children rode bikes along the freshly paved streets, neighbors waved from porches, and the wind whispered through the trees like a lullaby. He realized that victory was not in the court's ruling, nor in reclaiming land, but in creating a space where humanity could flourish. It was in choosing patience over anger, empathy over spite, and community over isolation. In that moment, Michael understood the simple, profound truth his father had always known. Life's greatest rewards are not measured in deeds or dollars, but in the hearts we touch, the lives we lift, and the hope we cultivate. And as he watched the neighborhood glow under the twilight, he smiled, not with pride, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had transformed an injustice into a legacy of kindness. The story of the land with 96 homes, once a symbol of greed and overreach, had become a beacon of hope. It reminded everyone who heard it that even when circumstances seem impossible, patience, empathy, and generosity can turn the tide, and that one person's compassion can ripple outward, touching countless lives in ways that endure far longer than any legal victory. Michael Thornton had not just reclaimed his land. He had reclaimed the spirit of his father's legacy, proving that true power lies not in taking, but in giving, and that, in giving, the world becomes immeasurably brighter.